So this is the iPad Air 5th gen, and it got a bit more pro because now it uses the exact same M1 chip that's inside the latest iPad Pro. The first thought that crossed my mind when Apple announced this was, what's the point of buying the iPad Pro now? But there seems to be many small but important things that the iPad Pro can do that this can't, and depending on what you're using it for, might be the better choice. Now, from a design standpoint, it looks exactly the same as the previous iPad Air, sporting a durable aluminum back and sturdy frame. The dimensions are identical, but the weight of the new Air is 0.01 pounds heavier. Now, this is impossible to feel, but it's the only physical difference between the two. The USB Type-C port on the bottom got an upgrade. It's now 2 times faster, capable of transferring up to 10 gigabits per second instead of 5. But if you're transferring a lot of big files, the iPad Pro uses Thunderbolt and can go up to 40 gigabits per second. There's no Face ID on any of the iPads except for the iPad Pro, but it has Touch ID embedded into the power button just like the previous model. It's extremely accurate, but it requires you to push the power button, then rest your finger before it logs you in. It requires an extra step that Face ID resolves with just one. Now, I do like how Apple thinks of the small things, like when you push the volume up button in portrait mode, the audio increases like it should. But as soon as you put the iPad in landscape, the same button becomes the volume down. The display is 10.9 inches, liquid retina with 264 pixels per inch, and 500 nits of brightness, the same as the previous model. It's a beautiful display with anti-reflective coating and supports True Tone. The only thing it doesn't have is ProMotion or a high refresh rate. That's still reserved for the iPad Pro. Now, I understand the iPad and maybe the Mini not having one, but I'm hoping Apple one day brings ProMotion to the Air. You have to understand, using a higher refresh rate, regardless of what processor is inside, makes everything feel faster. For example, drawing on the iPad Air feels good, but drawing on the iPad Pro feels great. Even though they both use the same Apple Pencil, the high refresh rate on the Pro lowers the latency of the pen, creating a more natural drawing experience. The rear camera remains at 12 megapixels, but has support for extended dynamic range, which the previous model did not. But the biggest camera update is in the front. It got bumped up from 7 megapixels to a 12 megapixel ultra-wide, and finally supports center stage. Center stage keeps you in the frame as you move around on a video call, which looks significantly better. Speakers are stereo with a total of 2. They sound good, but if you want the best, the iPad Pro has 4 and gets significantly louder. But the one thing that didn't get upgraded is the storage options. The base iPad Air still starts with 64 gigabytes of storage, with the next tier being 256. There's no 128 gigabyte tier, which seems like an upsell to spend more to get 256. That's a $150 price jump to get more space and puts you $50 away from the base iPad Pro. Now, if you're just doing general iPad things like email, browsing the net, and watching content, you can totally get away with 64. But if you're storing photos, videos, or plan on gaming, then 64 gigabytes is just not going to cut it. Genshin, a popular mobile game, uses anywhere from 8 to 15 gigabytes, eating a big portion of the total space. Now, I did not expect the iPad Air to come with an M1 processor. I honestly thought it would be the A15. The M1 compared to the A14, which is the previous one, delivers up to 60% more performance. It seems like they're sticking the M1 in everything. MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, iMac, iPad Pro, and now the iPad Air. I can't wait to see the Apple polishing cloth with M1. RAM got bumped up from 4 gigabytes to 8, and I benchmarked most of the newer iPads, and there's literally no difference between the new Air and M1 iPad Pro. But here's the thing. The previous iPad Air and current iPad Mini still feel really fast. Cellular users will be glad to know that the iPad Air 5 supports 5G, but it only supports sub-6 and not millimeter wave. Now, quite frankly, this is really not a big deal for me here in Canada, since all my bands are supported and millimeter wave will probably never come here. I did pop in my 5G SIM and got the exact same speeds I'd get on my iPhone. Pages loaded fast, and there was no drop connections. As for accessories, nothing has changed. So all the old accessories that worked on the previous iPad Air, like the Magic Keyboard, will work on the new iPad Air 5 too. Battery size is identical to the previous Air, and battery life is just as good. I was easily able to use this for 8 to 9 hours, doing things like checking my email, playing a few games, and watching movies. Just like all the other iPads, it does an amazing job holding battery when it's idle. Look, this is a great iterative update. instead of getting the A15, which most were expecting, it now comes with Apple's M1, a processor that still today is ahead of its time. And if you have an iPad Air 4 or the latest iPad mini, do not get jealous. Your iPad is still fantastic, and there's no reason to feel like you need to get this instead. But if you're coming from an iPad that's much older, then this will be a great upgrade. But the big question still becomes, should you get the iPad Air or iPad Pro? Well, if you're happy with 64 gigabytes, then stick with the iPad Air. It's a much better deal. But as soon as you want more storage, it gets a bit confusing, especially if you're planning on getting the 256 gigabyte model. It might start to make more sense to get the Pro instead. For $50 more, you get Face ID, an extra ultra-wide camera, LiDAR sensor, 4 speakers instead of 2, a brighter display, and a higher refresh rate. Performance will be identical, but you'll end up with 120 gigabytes of storage instead of 256. For me personally, the iPad Air and Mini are all the iPad that I need, but if you're an artist or using this as your main device, the Pro might make more sense in the long run. I hope this kind of helps you decide on picking the perfect iPad for you. If you have any more questions about this iPad, let me know in the comment section down below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.